I call the National Assembly to order, and the first item on our agenda this afternoon is questions to the First Minister, and the first question from Dai Lloyd.
Thank you very much. Llywydd, will the First Minister make a statement on the Welsh Government's plans for social services?
Well, social care is a sector of national strategic importance. The field has been protected through investment of an additional £55 million for 2017 to 18, alongside £60 million for the Integrated Care Fund.
Thank you for that response. And further to that, may I ask what measures are in place, led by the Welsh Government, in order to secure an adequate supply of home care services for our older people and those with disabilities, bearing in mind the increasing demand for these services and the shortage of funds to provide them to meet the increasing needs in this area?
Well, of course, I've alluded to the Integrated Care Fund and the money that's been invested in that, and of course the new funding that's already been announced. And we see this bearing in mind the transfer from hospital to care, that kind of delay is actually at its minimum level.
That I'm annoyed that Bridgend County Borough Council has cut £2 million from its social care budget, despite an additional £2 billion from the UK Government, and indeed Welsh Government money as well, additional money. Now, your Minister told me just before the recess that some money would be conditional going to councils, and that money would only go to them provided it could be shown it would be used for social care rather than other priorities. Now, I know you will have examined all the council budgets in Wales, so can you tell me, yes or no, whether you're sure that all the money that the Minister has set aside for social care will be used for social care and not for competing priorities?
Is there an election on Thursday? I asked myself. Yes, I'm sure that was all to do with the question that was asked. What I can say to the members is this. I think authorities across Wales have done very well in providing social services, despite the cuts that have come from her party, and her party in government, indeed, in London. We've seen the crisis in social care in England. That's a crisis that we've not had in Wales because of the investment we put into social care in Wales, and of course the extra £20 million that have already been announced. The last thing we want is to import that kind of chaos into Wales.
Dawn Bowden. Diolch, Llywydd. And First Minister, as a result of the implementation of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Wales Act, we've witnessed in recent years significant progress in the improved integration of health and social care, despite some of the comments being made today. And in particular, I mentioned the multi-agency safeguarding hub in the Cwmtaf area and the Clear Hardy Health Centre. Do you agree with me, First Minister, that one of the early priorities of any new council coming into being after the 4th of May should be to build on the excellent work to date carried out by current Labour councils like that in Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council?
I very much applaud the work of Merthyr Council, and I look forward to that work continuing, of course, in the next weeks to come.
Caroline Jones.
First Minister, we're fast approaching a point where social care is unaffordable, and unless we take urgent action, we are facing the real possibility that the system may collapse. Successive governments have failed to take account of the ageing population and properly plan for future demand. What discussions have you had with the UK Government about how to ensure the social care sector has sufficient funding to provide top quality care for all who need it now and in the future?
I think the member does raise an important point in that regard. We know that demand continues to increase, and there have to be debates in society as to how that demand is to be met. That does mean there have to be discussions between the governments of the UK, because people move between the countries of the UK. But we have ensured that there is sufficient funding for social care. We've increased that funding. But of course, it's hugely important in the long term to think carefully about how social care should be funded in the years to come.
Question 2.
Question 2, Sian Gwenllian. Will the First Minister make a statement on plans for a medical school for North Wales?
Well, work is ongoing to determine the appropriate approach to ensuring sustainable medical education and training within North Wales, and the Cabinet Secretary for Health, Wellbeing and Sport will be making a statement in the coming weeks.
The case for a medical school to serve North Wales and rural areas of our nation is clear and robust. The Betws Health Board will have spent over £21 million on employing agency medical staff over the past 11 months up until the end of February this year, and the Royal College of Physicians summarises the situation in one sentence.
Enough doctors out there, but that's the
Now, the establishment of a medical school in Bangor would be part of the process of training these additional doctors which we need in Wales. So when exactly will the business case be published, and when will the necessary steps taken to establish the medical school be put in place?
Well, there will be a statement over the ensuing weeks, and the Minister will be considering this over this week and the next, and so there'll be quite a statement will be coming swiftly, but we must ensure that any plans are ultimately sustainable, and that is part of the consideration being given to this issue.
Diolch. It's many years since I first discussed the need for a Bangor Medical School with its previous Vice-Chancellor and continue to have those discussions since. It's 3 years since the North Wales Local Medical Committee warned at a meeting in the Assembly that general practice in North Wales was, in their words, facing crisis, unable to fill vacancies, with GPs considering retirement. And they highlighted the fact that the previous supply from Liverpool Medical School had largely been severed, where their generation had primarily come from there. In considering, as you have agreed to do, the business case for a new medical school in Bangor, how will you ensure that that includes dialogue with Liverpool alongside Bangor to ensure that we keep local medics local?
Well, the issue is, of course, that the Bangor is in an area where the population is quite small compared to other centres where there is a medical school. So there are issues in terms of how could such a medical school work closely with other medical schools in Wales or in England or elsewhere, for that matter. What's hugely important is that any medical school is sustainable and that it works closely with others in order to ensure that sustainability is there in the future.
Michelle Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Graduates will come back to work in Wales if they have the desire and ability to do so. Does the First Minister agree that the Government needs also to look further at ways it can improve the life offer for the people of North Wales, as this flight of talent illustrates that too often those who move out to Wales to train or work often do so permanently?
Well, the scheme that the campaign that we have in place to recruit medical staff is working well. We've had a great deal of interest from those in all areas of medicine. Ultimately, lifestyle is important for people, but professional challenge is important. People want to go somewhere where they will find their work interesting, where they feel they will be challenged from a medical point of view, and of course they want to live somewhere where they feel they are supported. And the campaign that we've put in place has outlined all these issues to potential medical practitioners who wish to come to Wales, and the response has been encouraging.
Questions now from the party leaders. The leader of the UKIP group, Neil Hamilton.
Diane Abbott, the Shadow Home Secretary, has announced that Labour plans to recruit another 10,000 police officers in England and Wales, which would mean an extra nearly 1,000 in Wales. But she was rather sketchy about the cost of this proposal. First of all, announcing it was going to cost £300,000, which would be an average salary of £30 for a policeman. Secondly, it went up to £8,000 a year, £80 million. Perhaps the First Minister could give his own view of the credibility of this policy and what the actual figures are.
I think it's hugely important that we see more bobbies on the beat, more police officers, 10,000 of them. I think people will certainly support that. He asked the question, where does the money come from? Quite simple. £300 million a year over the course of 5 years. £2.7 billion is the pot of that will be created by reinstating the previous levels of capital gains tax, so £1.5 billion with £1.2 billion left over. Those are the maths.
Well, the First Minister is not aware of what happened last time capital gains tax was increased in 2010. Because in 2010, the rate of capital gains tax was raised from 18% to 28%. And whereas before the 23rd of June 2010, it raised £8.23 billion a year. After the 23rd of June 2010, it raised £3.3 billion a year. So actually, there was a cut in the revenue of capital gains tax of £4.9 billion a year. So how is this increase in police numbers going to be paid for with reduced tax revenues?
Well, it simply takes the rate back to what it was before, from 20 to 28 in the higher rate, and from 18 back from 20 rather to 28 on the higher level, and from 18 upwards on the lower level. That's the way in which this will be paid for. That simply means reinstating a tax rate that was there before, not something that is new.
The point I was making to the First Minister was, as a result of raising the rate of capital gains tax, the revenue raised from the tax fell, not increased. So, consequently, the tax base was reduced because people can postpone realising capital gains. In fact, the people who are most likely to want to realise capital gains are pensioners who can't afford to live on their incomes. So this is actually a tax increase which is aimed very largely at people who can least afford to pay it. But perhaps it's part. Perhaps the illiterate financial plan that has been put before us by the Labour Party is part of the overall plan that he committed himself to in my presence in a television studio in Cardiff just a couple of weeks ago, of increasing borrowing by £500 billion a year. Does he really think that the credibility of the UK government in international financial markets is going to be enhanced by such a stupid policy?
Neil Hamilton and UKIP, soft on crime. You heard it here in this Assembly for the first time. Not supportive of policy to increase the number of bobbies on the beat, to increase the number of police officers in our communities. We've explained how this will be paid for by reinstating the previous rate of capital gains tax. I do not see his point about pensioners losing out because of capital gains tax. I don't know if he's talking about inheritance tax, so he's got the two confused, but I do not see how that works. Capital gains tax affects those people with most money. And it's only right that those people with most money are asked to pay more in order to fund our police officers on the street. There's never been a cheaper time to borrow money on the world financial markets. The Labour government of the 1940s did this, built the health service, built the welfare state, rebuilt the British economy from a far worse position than the Tories did. Individuals know that if you want to buy a house, you have a mortgage. You pay that mortgage off over 20 to 30 years. You have an asset at the end of it that you're able to use as you want. They don't understand that in the Conservative Party. A lot of them, of course, never had mortgages. They don't know what the concept is. Things given to them on a plate. So from our perspective, we know the public understand. You borrow in order to create an asset that is then worth far more. That works for individuals, it'll work for Britain, and that's the kind of vision we want. A vision that rebuilds Britain, not one that lets it drift.
Arweinydd Plaid Cymru, Llawn.
Plaid Cymru leader Leanne Wood.
Diolch Llywydd. First Minister, in June last year, you said that Labour had no chance of winning a general election. Why have you abandoned ship?
I'm not sure I understand that question. I do know that Labour has a better chance of winning an election perhaps than Plaid Cymru does, but I mean, from our perspective, we will work hard, as indeed I know her party will, to maximise as many votes as possible between now and the 8th of June.
In the very same week that you said Labour had no chance of winning a general election, one of your senior frontbench MPs in Westminster resigned and derided your leader, Jeremy Corbyn. And you've now appointed him as your election coordinator for Wales. We've seen 5 different shadow secretaries of state for Wales from the Labour Party since the last UK election, 4 in the last 12 months. Not only have you abandoned ship, you're all squabbling over the lifeboats. First Minister, this is gross incompetence. Do you really expect people who have trusted your party for so long to have any confidence in your party's ability to defend Wales?
Well, we did last year. Welsh Labour showed that it could defend the people of Wales last year, and the Welsh people voted as they did, and we continue to do the same this year. From our perspective, we will be standing up for Wales in Westminster. We do not want the Tories to walk all over Wales.
Such complacency. First Minister, people need a national party. People need a national party of Wales that is going to protect this nation's interests. A party that will defend this institution, that will protect Welsh jobs, people's pensions and our NHS. Labour is in no fit state to defend Wales, and so the National Party of Wales is Plaid Cymru. Tomorrow there will be yet another vote on scrapping 0 hours contracts. It will be the 7th time we've had a vote on this. 6 times Labour and the Tories have voted together against Plaid Cymru's proposals to end 0 hours contracts. Tell me, First Minister, are you going to make it 7 times tomorrow? Will you again vote with the Tories against Welsh workers and against the Welsh national interest?
Well, it's always been a myth in Plaid Cymru that Plaid Cymru stands for the Welsh national interest. If that's true, they'll be doing far better in elections than they are. And I do deplore the idea that somehow one party has a monopoly on patriotism or in terms of defending Wales's interest. Now, I know that inevitably over the next few weeks we're going to have questions in this chamber that affect the general election. We all know that, but I do think people deserve to have questions asked of them about what's going to happen here in Wales, in the Assembly. 0 hours contracts are an issue which we do not support 0 hours contracts. She's trying to suggest that somehow in principle we think they're a good thing. We don't think they're a good thing. But for any number of reasons over the past few occasions, she has known that there have been issues surrounding what Plaid Cymru want to do that would in some instances jeopardise the passage of legislation because of the lack of clarity over devolved competence. And the reality of the situation is that we have led the way when it comes to getting rid of 0 hours contracts. We've done so in government, we've done so in organisations that are funded by government. She has talked, we have done.
Leader of the Opposition, Andrew Davis.
Presiding Officer, could I first of all welcome the new clerk to the Assembly. This is her first Minister's questions, and I look forward to working with you over the coming months and years that you fill the role that was so admirably done by Claire Clancy. First Minister, you have just said that you want questions asked of you that are relevant to this place, and I do want to draw on the Auditor General's report last week about the Circuit of Wales and the funding of the Circuit for Wales, and in particular the points that the Auditor General drew on, in particular about government money, Welsh government money, being used to buy a motorcycle firm in Buckinghamshire that went bankrupt. Is that a good use of Welsh taxpayers' money, £300,000 worth of Welsh taxpayers' money, to buy a motorcycle company in Buckinghamshire that then went bankrupt? And if it isn't a good use of Welsh taxpayers' money, will you apologise for that?
Look, we've just had a report last week where the Cancer Drugs Fund was shown to have wasted £1 billion of public money. So I'm not going to be lectured on that by the Conservative Party. Yeah, they asked the question, and it's quite simple. The answer is quite simply this. Whenever you have a project like the Circuit of Wales, there will be risks. Those risks have to be managed acceptably. The Circuit of Wales is still in play. We are looking to see whether a model can be produced in order to take the project forward, and we think the people of Llawn and Gwent and the people of Wales would expect us to do that. Inevitably, whenever there is any kind of project that is risk, banks do this. When banks lend money, they acknowledge there's a level of risk, but that risk has to be acceptable. It's the same for government.
That is the most bizarre answer in 6 years that I've stood here I've received from you, First Minister. I asked you a simple question about Welsh Government money that was used to buy a motorcycle firm in Buckinghamshire that went bankrupt. £300,000 that the Auditor General, in a report that he released last week, and you've called for questions that are relevant to you in your role as First Minister, and you don't believe that you will explain that or even apologise for that fact. Secondly, the report outlined how officials highlighted to ministers that they believed that you would be in breach of state aid rules by allowing the £7.3 million loan guarantee to be put in place and then drawn down. Now, officials gave that advice to ministers. The Auditor General could not find any evidence to contradict that advice that was given to ministers. So why did ministers put the Welsh Government and Welsh taxpayers' money at risk and potentially for infringement proceedings by the European Commission because you're breaking state aid rules? Yeah, it doesn't sound the way state aid rules works. Normally, when state aid rules are breached, it's the recipient that pays back, not the government. From our perspective, we will assess the situation to see that whether the risk is acceptable. Two things that have to be made about the Circuit of Wales. Firstly, the Auditor General has not said that this is a project not worth supporting. Nor has the Auditor General said that the Circuit of Wales is a business organisation with no assets, contrary to his own MP, David Davis, what he has said. Yes, in the course of the development of the Circuit of Wales, there is an assessment of risk. Decisions are taken to accept that risk if deemed necessary, and then, of course, we move on to see if the Circuit of Wales can become a reality. That is what governments do, to look at risk, make sure that risk is acceptable, because ultimately the prize might be one that is worth having. We're not at that stage yet. We're still working to see whether the Circuit of Wales can produce that sustainable model. First Minister, the Auditor General was very specific in what he was looking at, which was this tranche of money that Welsh Government has spent to date, £9.3 million. In anyone's book, that's a pretty significant sum of money. No one is disputing that potentially the overall scheme could have a massive impact of regeneration, but you are accountable for the way money is allocated. I've highlighted to you 2 examples in the Auditor General's report. One, buying a motorcycle firm in Buckinghamshire that went bankrupt for £300,000. I mean, what claims, what bids will you accept if you're accepting bids like that? And 2, that you infringe state aid rules by putting the loan guarantee in place. Both of which are those examples you haven't apologised for, or you've actually haven't discounted to say it is incorrect. What exactly can we expect from the Welsh Government, given that there's a litany of examples from RIFU, where officials' advices were totally ignored and ministers just proceeded to dispose of land, high-value land, where officials were discounted in the process, and the public lost out through losing money when overall sales were concluded in RIFU, and this is the same example where public money has been put in jeopardy, as the Auditor General has pointed out. How can we have any confidence that your government is working positively to either form a positive conclusion on this agreement, or that you will end up putting more public money at risk?
No, the agreement is one that we would want to be positive. We're not looking to put any more public money in. We're looking to work with a private investor for the future. All these things are under discussion at the moment. But I remind the leader of the Welsh Conservatives that sometimes you have to take a decision in order to benefit people in the future. Last week we saw the decision by Qatar Airways to fly a daily flight into Cardiff Airport. If he had had his way, that airport would be shut. It would be closed down. He sat there questioning the fact the Welsh Government had bought the airport. We've seen great passenger growth. We see Qatar Airways coming in. I was there over the weekend. There are huge opportunities for Wales as a result of that. Let him apologise for the fact that he was willing to put 1,000 jobs at risk in the Vale of Glamorgan, by letting the airport close. On top of that, we have unemployment that is lower than England, lower than Scotland, lower than Northern Ireland. We have a situation where the 5 companies that have grown most in Wales over the past year are companies that we as a Welsh Government have helped. The fact that we've had the best foreign direct investment figures for the past 30 years. The reality is that we create jobs when the Tories destroy them.
Question 3, Paul.
Question 3, Paul Davies. Thank you, Llywydd. What's the Welsh Government doing to support the housing needs of people in Pembrokeshire?
We are making significant investment in all types of housing tenures in Pembrokeshire and across Wales. This includes continued investment in social housing and Help to Buy Wales, as well as through new schemes aiming to make home ownership more accessible and support innovation.
Thank you for that response, First Minister. I recently met representatives of the Housing Association Hafan Las to discuss the housing needs of the people of Cyflwynir in Pembrokeshire. That would mean providing affordable housing for local people with at least 1/3 of the residents over 50 years of age in order to bridge between the generations. So would you agree with me, therefore, that we should be encouraging projects of this sort? And if so, can you tell me what support the Welsh Government is providing to projects such as this one?
Well, of course, it would be interesting if Hafan Las officials could meet our officials to understand better the model that they have. And I'm sure should they want to do that, we would welcome a meeting.
Thank you, Llywydd. The problem of second homes and holiday homes is a particular problem in Pembrokeshire, as it is in a number of areas that are popular with visitors and tourists and people who are looking to retire to those areas. And of course, it overheats the local housing market. And in terms of the incomes available to local people, particularly young people, there are whole streets in Tenby where nobody is living for most of the year. So what can the government do to assist in that context? Plaid Cymru has proposed that planning regulations could be used in certain communities in order to ensure that there is a change of use when a home leaves a permanent occupation and becomes a holiday home. Isn't that deserving of consideration by government?
Well, this is something that has been discussed and considered previously, but it is much more difficult in practice rather than in principle as regards what kind of definition you place on a second home. But having said that, I understand exactly what the member is saying about the impact on communities, and we've ensured that there's more social housing available, and other considerations have been made, such as trusts to acquire land so that people can construct their own homes, and also sharing of property equity. And in the future, we can maybe look at how to purchase houses from the private market so that the houses are available, particularly in villages. So there are a number of ways in which we can secure a future for those people who wish to live and remain in those communities, but perhaps we need to think more imaginatively than the traditional ways of thinking to date.
Question 4, Hywranka Davies.
What assessment has the First Minister made of the benefit to Wales if the UK government were to borrow more to invest at the current low rates?
Well, any increase in public expenditure in comparable areas will mean more money for Wales to support our priorities as set out in taking Wales forward, as long as, of course, it's capital expenditure.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. In household terms, as he outlined in response to an earlier question, we're all very used to the idea of balancing the books, managing income and outgoings, and critically managing debt, whether that's on the mortgage on our home or on our family car. Now, government borrowing is far more complex, of course, but the basic principles remain, including managing your debt at any given time. Yet classic economics recognises that for government borrowing, there are times, especially when the cost of borrowing is as low as it is now, when borrowing can be used to reverse austerity and bring growth. And by bringing growth, ensuring that the deficit remains at the same percentage of GDP. So, isn't it time, I say to the First Minister, for the UK government to change its approach for the good of the country, for Wales and the UK, or for the good of the country? Isn't it time to change the UK government?
Well, absolutely. All governments borrow. Margaret Thatcher borrowed every single year. In fact, borrowing up under the Tories. But they used that borrowing to pay for tax decreases. That's how unsustainable that was. The current Conservative government have borrowed money. I don't criticise them for that, because I know it's a part of government. The issue is borrow money to invest in capital infrastructure, and secondly, borrow money in a way that's prudent, so that the debt doesn't become unmanageable. The problem we have at the moment is we have a government in London that's completely without vision, doesn't know what it wants to do, has no vision for investment in infrastructure. We were promised electrification of the South Wales main line. Where is it? That's disappeared off the horizon. No decision on the Swansea Bay tidal lagoon. No decision on HS2. No decision on Heathrow. We've had absolutely dithering, complete and utter dithering for the past year from the UK government when it comes to funding essential capital infrastructure. Countries that do not invest in their infrastructure decline. They cannot compete with other countries around the world. And the problem we have with the current UK government is they're just not willing to invest.
Nick Ramsey.
First Minister, let's please get a little bit of sanity back into this question. Borrowing is, of course, an important tool in any government's toolbox. It's an important tool for the Welsh Government. It's been an important tool for the UK Government. But the levels of borrowing being proposed by the UK Labour Party are truly eye-watering. And in your heart of hearts, you know that. Would you agree with me that the last thing that this country needs, the last thing that the UK needs, and the last thing that Wales needs is for Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party to ratchet up the debt once again, and for us to end up in the same sort of position we've been in every time that the Labour Party has been in power in the UK government before?
Britain's best years are always under Labour. Always economically. Look at the stats. Look at where we are now. Look at where we were in 2011, 2012, 2013. Look at where we were at the start of the last decade. Much better a position than we are in now. We were in a much better position then than we were in the 1980s, when the Tories' main manufacturing product was higher employment. They took Wales to a level of unemployment well beyond 10%. We need competent economic policies and government, which the Tories have never, ever given us. And so it is hugely important that we have a UK government that understands the value of investment, of capital investment, has a vision for the country, and doesn't keep on saying we need stable and strong leadership. Well, stable and strong leadership, let me tell you, involves doing leadership debates, talking to ordinary people, not having events that are closed off to the regional press, as was the case in Cornwall today, and a Prime Minister who is strong and not one who acts as a frightened rabbit.
Adam Price.
If we follow the logic of the First Minister, that now is the time to take advantage of historically low interest rates, why is it that his own government's Finance Secretary is limiting the financing through the mutual investment model to £1 billion, not increasing it to the £7.5 billion suggested by Jerry Holtham, who was a senior advisor to his government. Isn't this yet another example of the Labour Party saying one thing in its British manifesto and doing a different thing in Wales? That's the kind of hypocrisy that has given democratic politics a bad name.
Says the man described in his election leaflet as the Mab of Rydlon, the lost prophet of Wales. Who am I to argue with him, described that way? And he allowed it to appear in his leaflet, would you believe? But there we are. He asked the question. The reality is it's 1.5 billion, and we will borrow up to a level that is prudent. And 1.5 billion in Welsh terms and devolved terms is, we believe, a prudent level of borrowing.
Question 5, David.
Question 5, David Rees.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the progress being made to attract investment into the enterprise zone in Port Talbot?
Yes, we know the enterprise zone is a powerful marketing lever. We know that its proximity to the new Swansea Bay campus, to the new to the areas, in terms of the area's assisted area status, is hugely important, and we know the zone is a compelling proposition for investment.
Well, thank you for that answer, First Minister. As you know, the enterprise zone in Port Talbot was established due to the real threat of closure of the steelworks, following Tata's original decision to sell off its UK operations. And that threat's not going away, and it's important that we now diversify our manufacturing and other industries within Port Talbot. However, its proposed new site for a new prison in Port Talbot is actually believed to be within the Port Talbot enterprise zone. What analysis has the Welsh Government undertaken to actually consider the impact that building a prison in that enterprise zone will have on attracting new businesses and supporting economic growth in existing businesses to build a stronger economy based upon skills available in manufacturing and high-tech that's in Port Talbot? Now, on the basis of the analysis result given a negative outcome, will the Welsh Government fail to sell or lease the land to the Ministry of Justice?
Well, we haven't conducted that analysis as yet. What I can say, however, to the members, just to reassure him, I have a prison in my constituency. In fact, it was built when I was the ward councillor in my ward. And indeed, people were concerned. They were worried about what the impact of the prison might be. The reality is it hasn't had a negative impact at all. In fact, it employs a large number of people locally. It's provided work for a large number of contractors. So, whilst I can well understand some of his constituents being concerned, and he has represented the views of those constituents this afternoon, the experience that we have in Bridgend is that the prison itself, in fact, there's a housing estate being built next to it as we speak. So the prison quickly becomes integrated into the life of the community, and it can, in fact, be a job creator.
Susie Davis.
Diolch, Llywydd. The Swansea Bay City Region deal, which you and Theresa May, of course, both signed recently in Swansea, is set to trigger £1.3 billion worth of investment in the region. And the proximity of the university that you've mentioned already, and the emphasis on steel-based supply chain within the enterprise zone fits very well with a number of projects in that deal. The Enterprise Zone Board also hopes to create opportunities and promote innovation and entrepreneurship in advanced manufacturing and materials. So what kind of help can we expect from Welsh Government to help the local steel sector take advantage of R&D and commercialisations in those other two sectors in order to improve the local economy?
We have been working with Swansea University in terms of R&D. We've been working with Tata to move R&D into the South Wales. We want to be manufacturers, but we want to make sure as much R&D as possible takes place in Wales as well. There are great opportunities there for Tata. We believe there are great opportunities with the lagoon. The lagoon is widely supported in this chamber. I don't make that point in any political sense. I do hope that whatever happens after the 8th of June, we will have a decision that is positive about the lagoon to create 1,000 jobs in the area, which will be a huge catalyst in terms of job creation within the enterprise zone.
Bethan Jenkins.
First Minister, I heard your response to David Rees, but I didn't hear whether you as First Minister and as a government who would be supporting the prison in Port Talbot. I recognise what you say about Bridgend, but you will understand that the prison in Port Talbot, if it is built, will be significantly over capacity and is not something that we think will add benefit to the local economy. I've had concerns from local people with regards to the fact that many of them are trying to rent out space of over 10,000 square foot in Port Talbot, small businesses wanting to develop who are now moving to your area. I'm sure you're pleased to hear that, but they can't stay in Port Talbot. So could you not be focusing on the real everyday issues that small businesses are facing as opposed to imposing a super prison on Port Talbot? Well,
the decision to build prisons are ours. Prisons are not devolved. We'll examine, of course, any and all consequences of building a prison. Bridgend already has a prison, of course. So if people are moving to Bridgend, then the prison hasn't affected their decision in that regard. But it is important that all these things are considered very, very carefully. It's important that the UK government makes very clear what it believes the prison can deliver, not just in terms of prison capacity, but also in terms of the local economy, and for them to make the case for the prison. And we'll examine carefully what their case is.
Question 6, Llawn.
Question 6, Llawn Wood.
Will the First Minister outline the Welsh Government's plans to improve access to primary health care?
Yeah, through modernising our primary care services, we want access to continue to improve when local issues arise. As they will, we expect health boards to ensure local needs continue to be met.
In my constituency, we've experienced big problems with GP retention and recruitment, and it's of particular concern in the Rhondda because we have an ageing population and an ageing GP population to match. Last year, we saw the closure of T. Horeb surgery in Treorchy, and less than a fortnight ago, Mardy surgery patients were told to go to Ferndale surgery because GP cover could not be arranged for that particular day. This caused a lot of concern in an area where appointments are difficult to come by at the best of times. With all the problems in the NHS in England, why is recruitment such a problem in Wales? Doctors should be falling over themselves to come and work in Wales, but you failed to capitalise on that situation. Do you also regret that after 18 years of Labour running the NHS in Wales, we still have one of the worst patient-doctor numbers in the whole of the EU?
We have more GPs than ever before. We're getting to a situation, we are at the stage where more and more GPs are looking to come to work in Wales. But it's hugely important that the structure of general practice in Wales is attractive. It is a reality, in my mind, that more and more GPs want to be salaried. They don't want to buy into a practice, so they don't want to work within that model. Why? They've come through medical school with debt to actually fork out more money. Is not an attractive proposition for many of them. The contractor model will be attractive for some, and that will be an important part of the NHS for years to come. She is right about what happened in Mardy. I know that there was an issue there on one day because of an unforeseen circumstance. The cover wasn't there. That is something that I can understand people in Mardy being frustrated about. It's part of the Ferndale practice, but nevertheless, there is a branch surgery in Mardy. But what we are finding, of course, is that, for example, we've seen a 16% increase in the number of GP training places filled so far compared to last year. The £43 million primary care fund has helped provide more than 250 additional primary care posts, including GPs, nursing posts, pharmacists and physiotherapists. And importantly, work is being taken forward in Cwmtaf, of course the Rhondda is part of that, to working across 8 practices in one cluster. So surgeries that are quite small, that do find it difficult to provide cover at the level that will be expected these days, are able to work together in order to provide the comprehensive cover that people need.
Angela Burns.
Patients not only need to have access to good GP surgeries and good GPs, but also they need to have quality of that access. And we all accept, and I think there's a growing recognition, that GPs should be left to deal with the more complex cases and those with multiple comorbidities. And we welcome the growth in the allied healthcare professionals. We welcome the growth in having counsellors in GP surgeries, in having chronic care condition nurses, palliative care specialists and so on. But I do wonder, First Minister, what discussions your government might have had in terms of extending the appointment time. Because if a GP who's already under enormous pressure has to see a patient with complex healthcare issues or comorbidities and write up that note, the standard 10 minutes is a very difficult thing for them to undertake all that work in. And I wonder if your government has had any consideration of that particular matter.
Well, can I welcome, first of all, what the member said about not piling, it's not the way she put it, but it's what she meant, not piling all the pressure on GPs. A good number of cases that appear before GPs don't need a GP, which is why it's hugely important. We have Choose Well, of course, and we see when health boards take over practices, they become multidisciplinary. People can be directed to the nurse, to the pharmacist, to the OT, to the physiotherapist, as appropriate, rather than everybody piling onto the GP. The challenge for the smaller practices is to be able to take pressure off themselves in the future by working with other practices to provide wider and more holistic services between them. So, for example, is it reasonable for a single-handed practice to employ lots of nurses or physiotherapists? No, but working with other practices, it then becomes far more viable for that to happen. But it is hugely important. that we don't find. She doesn't do this, in fairness. It is hugely important. It's not to think that primary care is not just about GPs. It's about making sure people get the right level of care at the right time. You take pressure on GPs, you release more time for them to see the patients that need more time to be seen.
Question 7, Julie.
Question 7, Julie Morgan.
What assessment has the First Minister made of the future opportunities for organisations relocating to Wales from the south-east of England?
Yes, a large proportion of recent investments from companies headquartered elsewhere in the UK have indeed come from London and the south-east of England.
I thank the First Minister for that response. Does the First Minister support the call from the leader of the Cardiff Council for the UK government, for Channel 4 to be relocated to Cardiff in view of the success of the media industry in Cardiff and as part of the consultation that is now going on about the future of Channel 4?
Yes, I do, very much. I think Cardiff has a great deal to offer in terms of media services. We've seen huge growth in creative industries, not just in Cardiff but outside. We've seen huge growth in the media in Cardiff, and Cardiff would be an ideal headquarters for Channel 4.
Question 8, Mark.
Question 8, Mark Reckler.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the appropriate magnitude of borrowing for Welsh Government in the UK context?
I'm just readjusting myself there to where the member is now sitting. We will maximise all the tools available to support the economy and public services in Wales, including making best use of the £1 billion of borrowing powers secured through the new fiscal framework.
First Minister, whether the question is £1 billion or £1.5 billion of borrowing for Wales or £500 billion of borrowing for the UK, your answer seems to be the same. Let's borrow, it's cheap. There seems to be less consideration to how we would pay that money back or what would happen if interest rates go up. Do you seriously believe it's appropriate for the UK to borrow 300 times as much as Wales? And if so, is your position any more credible than Jeremy Corbyn's?
The UK has far more fiscal tools available to it than the Welsh Government in terms of the way in which it can borrow, in terms of the taxation policies available to it. We know that the party that you sit over on that side of the chamber with will not rule out a rise in income tax. I appreciate that honesty, but I think it's right to say that even the Conservative Party is considering increasing income taxes in the future in order to provide more money for the public purse. Now, they've been asked several times to rule it out, and several times that has not been ruled out. The point is this. Borrowing for infrastructure investment is important. It must be prudent. I take that point, and it must be affordable. But what is affordable for the UK is many times more than what is affordable for Wales because of the tools at the UK's disposal and its ability to raise money. It was done in the 40s, when the situation was far, far worse than this. The infrastructure was rebuilt. The UK got back on its feet into the 50s. If it could be done in the 40s, when borrowing rates were higher and the situation much worse, then why is it so unreasonable to say that it can't be done now?
Question now, Joyce.
Question 9, Joyce Watson.
What assessment has the First Minister made of the impact of the Trade Union Act 2016, which came into force in March this year?
Our assessment of the Trade Union Act remains that it's divisive, damaging and risks undermining public services and the economy.
I thank you for that answer, and I share your opinion. Do you agree that by enforcing public sector employers to publish information on facility time, that is, the time taken off from work to allow union representatives to carry out their duties when helping employees, that by doing this, the Trade Union Act 2016 blatantly discriminates against public sector workers and serves to weaken their rights and their working conditions? And what, First Minister, is the Welsh Government doing to help protect workers' rights across Wales?
Well, we, of course, are taking forward legislation in this Assembly to do just that in areas that we believe are devolved. It is a bureaucratic imposition on public sector employers that they have to do this. It's not something that the private sector is required to do. But also, it seems to indicate that somehow the current UK government sees public sector workers as somehow not as good as those in the private sector. That's the insinuation that somehow they're spending all their time in facility time and not actually doing any real work. That's not the case at all. We know that huge amounts of work go into the public sector from so many hundreds of thousands of people up and down the length and breadth of Wales, and that is why this legislation was so unnecessary.
Question 10, Stephen.
Question 10, Stefan Lewis.
Government's plans for making Wales a fair work nation.
Yeah, I'm in close discussion with our social partners on fair work and the steps we can take together so that more people have access to good work and a secure income. And tomorrow I'm meeting with our social partners, the Wales TUC and business organisations, to discuss the establishment of a Fair Work Commission.
I thank the First Minister for his answer, although he did make this announcement in his Labour Party conference speech back in the spring, and it's disappointing that given developments at the UK level that this Fair Work Commission hasn't been established. According to the most recent data I've been able to find, Wales is among the least fair nations in terms of work in these islands. 45,000 people are classed as being low-paid self-employed. 60% of temporary workers want but cannot get permanent jobs, and 42,000 people are on 0 hours contracts. When he eventually gets around to establishing a Fair Work Commission, can he give a commitment that part of its terms of reference will be to review all previous and current trade union legislation as they relate to devolved areas, so that we in Wales can take the spirit that his government has shown in relation to the 2016 trade union bill and amend all regressive anti-trade union legislation in this country?
Well, I wouldn't want to prejudge the discussion that takes place tomorrow, but I take on board what he has said. It's hugely important that we get support and buy-in from all sectors of industry as we look at fair work. In addition to working with the social partners, I have also already asked the Public Policy Institute for Wales to undertake some work on this, specifically in terms of defining what fair work is. Yeah, we'll have an idea of what fair work looks like, but it's hugely important to define it as strongly as possible in order for the Commission's work to be effective.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog.
Thank you, First Minister. The next item on our agenda.